The main form of capital punishment was by hanging in the British Isles and predates the Anglo-Saxon era, and was used from ancient times until the second half of the 20th century. Initially, this involved placing a noose around the neck of the condemned and suspending them from the branch of a tree. Ladders and carts were used to hang people from wooden gallows, which entailed death by asphyxiation. Later, the new drop gallows, first used at London's Newgate prison in 1783, could accommodate 2 or 3 prisoners at a time and were constructed on platforms with trapdoors through which the condemned fell. The innovation of the long drop in the 19th century caused death by breaking the neck, which was deemed quicker and less painful than strangling. The last executions by hanging took place in 1964. Capital punishment for murder was suspended in 1965 and finally abolished in 1969. Although unused, the death penalty remained a legally defined punishment for certain offences, such as treason, until it was completely abolished in 1998. The last execution for treason took place in 1946. This episode covers a rare event in 1849. It was the first time, after a sensational Victorian-era trial, that a husband and wife had been executed together in England since 1700. This is Vintage Murders and the disturbing case of the Bermondsey Horror. Marie Manning was a domestic servant, and she was born Marie de Roux in 1825 in the Swiss town of Lausanne of Swiss-French parents, and ended up in domestic service on her arrival in England. She subsequently became a maid to Lady Blantyre at Stafford House in 1846. A couple of months later, Patrick O'Connor, whom she had previously met by chance, came to Stafford House, where she was living, and he took her out to dinner. She told him she had recently met Frederick Manning, who was, at the time, a train guard for the Great Western Railway. Both men were smitten, and both proposed to her over the course of the next few weeks. Marie just had to work out which one had the most money. O'Connor seemed to be the richer. He spent freely, but he drank a great deal, and she had no desire to settle herself with an alcoholic. Manning currently only had his wages as a guard, but told her that he expected to inherit a fortune from his mother. This was enough to convince Marie, and the pair were married in St. James's Church, Piccadilly, in May 1847. Manning no longer had his job on the railway, and acquired a public house. He was absolutely useless as a publican, and the pair soon had to sell up and move back to Bermondsey in London, and it was around this time that Marie discovered that her husband had in fact no fortune to inherit. Manning had a rather dubious background, and originally had been a railway worker until he was sacked on suspicion of being involved in a number of thefts of the company's property. Marie had developed a taste for the trappings of luxury whilst she worked in her employer's grand house, and came to dread the thought of poverty. She had been on a boat in 1846 to Boulogne, where she had originally met Patrick O'Connor, a 50-year-old Irishman from Tipperary, who worked as a customs official in London's docks. She was charmed by the man and suggested that he contact her next time she was in London, and this friendship continued after she was married. O'Connor, besides being involved with the docks, was also a moneylender who charged exorbitant interest rates. This consequently made him quite well off, and he was able to invest his money wisely. Despite being married, the 28-year-old Marie fell in love with O'Connor, a relationship that was accepted seemingly wholeheartedly by her husband Frederick. Using his business acumen, it had been O'Connor who had recommended that the Mannings should rent a pub in Shoreditch, but when the concern failed to make any profit, Marie accused O'Connor of cheating them and demanded compensation. She met O'Connor several more times, and they both embarked on an affair, instigated by Marie. As a consequence, perhaps oddly, he was friends with both of the Mannings, occasionally visiting them for dinner. By this time, Marie realized that she had made a mistake in marrying Frederick. She had also found out that O'Connor was a man of considerable wealth. Not only did he own a large amount of railway stocks and shares, he was doing well with his money-lending activities. It would have been around this time that Marie made up her mind to get her hands on her lover's fortune. In July 1849, a sack of lime was delivered to the Mannings' house, which Marie paid for in person. A few days later, a large shovel was delivered, and on the same day, Marie sent a letter to O'Connor, inviting him to come to dinner that evening. Her plans were temporarily thwarted, as he turned up with a friend named Walsh. Not being put off from her true purpose, she asked O'Connor to return the following evening, and suggested that, if he came alone, there might be more on the menu than dinner. The following evening, on the 9th of August, O'Connor was seen by friends crossing London Bridge, and the Mannings' neighbours noticed the Irishman smoking a cigar by the back door. Marie told him to wash his hands in preparation for dinner and led him into the kitchen, a lower-level room. As O'Connor turned towards the basin, Marie coldly put a pistol behind his ear and pulled the trigger. Her husband, on hearing the shot, hurried downstairs to the kitchen, only to find out that O'Connor was not dead and he was trying to speak. In Manning's own words, "I never killed him, so I battered his head with a crowbar." Some of the flagstones on the kitchen floor were prized up, and a hole dug large enough to hide the body of O'Connor, which was quickly covered in lime and assigned to the grave under the flagstones, which were hastily replaced and the joints mortared. After clearing away any evidence of their activities, the pair then sat down and ate their dinner. The following morning, Marie turned up at O'Connor's lodgings in Greenwood Street. His landlady let her into O'Connor's room, and she rifled through his belongings, taking several £100 in cash, gold watches and chains, and a wad of foreign bonds. The next day, on another pretext, she returned and had another search for some more bonds that she felt ought to be there, but found nothing new. On the 12th of August, 2 men turned up at the Mannings' home. They said they were Customs House officers and were concerned about the disappearance of their colleague. The Mannings admitted that O'Connor had dined with them on the 8th, but said they had not seen him since. The 2 men found this strange, as they had already spoken to the friends who had seen O'Connor on London Bridge on the 9th, when he had said that he was dining with Marie. She insisted that they must be mistaken, and asked them to let her know if they learned of O'Connor's whereabouts. Once they had left, Frederick got into a panic, telling his wife that the men were not Customs House officers, but in fact the police. This threw Marie into a panic as well, and they decided that they had to flee before their crime was detected. She told her husband to go to a relative named Bainbridge, and to sell the furniture for whatever could be got. As soon as he left, Marie collected together everything of value that she could carry, and fled the house. Neighbours saw her leaving in a cab with 3 or 4 trunks tied to its roof. When Frederick returned and found the house a shambles and his wife gone, he realized that he was on his own. He grabbed what remaining items he could and went to Waterloo Station, where he caught the boat train for Jersey. Police investigating the disappearance of O'Connor discovered from his landlady that a woman matching Marie's description had ransacked O'Connor's room. They immediately went to the Mannings' house on the 17th of August. During a detailed search of the premises, one of the officers noticed the fresh cement around some of the flagstones in the kitchen, and, on lifting them, they discovered a man's body, his wrists bound behind him, his legs doubled up and tied. Quicklime had been poured over the corpse in an attempt to prevent any identification, but dental checks on the set of false teeth found in the remains confirmed that the victim was indeed O'Connor. The word went out to apprehend the Mannings. Following an appeal to the public for any information by Scotland Yard, a taxi driver came forward and told of taking Marie to the South Eastern Railway Station. There, using the name Mrs. Smith, she had left 2 trunks, and had then been driven to King's Cross, where the police found 2 officials who remembered a woman who spoke English and French and was in a highly nervous state. She had taken the 6:15 a.m. train to Edinburgh. The police immediately telegraphed their counterparts in Scotland, asking them to urgently look out for this woman. Meanwhile, the hapless Frederick had another week's freedom before he was caught. While he was staying in St. Helier in the Channel Islands, he drew attention to himself by drinking prodigious amounts of brandy each day, and when he met a man who had known him in London, hastily fled to nearby St. Lawrence. The man who had spotted Manning read of the case in the papers when he returned to London, and lost no time telling the police. On August the 21st, Frederick was apprehended in his room and was returned to the awaiting police in London. That the death was not accidental was evidenced by the single bullet discovered with the mutilated skull. But up north the situation had already developed, and Marie was already in custody. She had tried to sell some of O'Connor's railway bonds to a firm of brokers, and had told them that her father was a Mr. Robertson, a native Scot. This did not fit with her pronounced French accent, and immediately aroused their suspicions. They had previously been warned that some railway stocks had been stolen in London, and that they should be cautious if they came across anyone trying to sell some. Marie was subsequently returned to London, where she was charged with the murder and remanded in Horsemonger Lane Prison. Their trial opened at the Old Bailey on the 25th of October 1849 and lasted 2 days. Each blamed the other for the crime, although the facts that the stocks and shares were found in Marie's possession, and that she could not possibly have buried O'Connor's body single-handed, left the jury in little doubt that both were equally culpable. After just 45 minutes, a verdict of guilty was announced. Defending herself to the last, Marie furiously declared that she was innocent, and the only man she would have killed would have been that man, pointing to her husband, who she said had made her life hell on earth. When both were given the death sentence, she gave vent to a furious tirade against Judge Cresswell and the jury, claiming that such an injustice would never have happened in Switzerland. Her outburst was ignored by the judge, ordering, "Take them down," and the couple were escorted below and transported to Horsemonger's Lane Prison, situated near Elephant and Castle in Southwark, there to wait for execution. Even in the condemned cell, Marie refused to give up her fight for freedom. She had once been a servant in the household of Lady Blantyre, whose mother, the Duchess of Sutherland, had been a close friend of Queen Victoria, so she sent a letter to the Queen appealing for mercy. Not receiving a reply, Desperately, she attempted to take her own life. Taking advantage of a moment in the middle of the night, when her 3 wardens were asleep, she tried to pierce her windpipe with her sharp-pointed fingernails. One of the warders, waking up, realized what was happening, and it took the efforts of all 3 to tear her hands away from her throat and subdue her. On Tuesday morning, the 13th of November 1849, the doomed couple met in the prison chapel, and it was reported that as they stood before the altar, Frederick expressed his wish that they should not part in animosity. She replied that she had none, and then kissed him. The prison vicar administered the last sacrament, after which Frederick said, "I think we shall meet in heaven." The veteran executioner, William Calcraft, then appeared and tied the arms of his prisoners behind their backs. It was a bitterly cold morning, and the hangman tried to show some solicitude for his female victim, urging her to allow the wardress to wrap her cloak around her. Instead, she asked that her black silk handkerchief be tied around her eyes under the black veil she already wore, so that she would not have to see the waiting gallows, or the vast crowds whose hubbub she could hear in the distance. Blindfolded, she was led by Mr. Harris, the prison surgeon, in a sombre procession along the seemingly endless passageways and up the steep steps to where the scaffold had been erected. Horsemonger Lane Prison had a flat roof over the entrance gates, and so provided a perfect stage for the drama due to take place. Below, there were more than 30,000 spectators filling every available space on the cobbles, in balconies and clinging to chimney stacks on rooftops, with no fewer than 500 police constables attempting to maintain some semblance of order. Journalistic hyperbole, not necessarily factual, was extensively used in the newspapers of the day when describing an execution, and when Frederick Manning ascended the steps leading to the gallows, his legs collapsed under him and he appeared scarcely able to move. When his wife approached the scaffold, he turned round, his face towards the people, while Calcraft, the executioner, proceeded to put a hood over his head and adjust the rope. With all the necessary preparations being now completed, the scaffold was cleared of all its occupants, except the 2 doomed to die. The mob fell hushed and silent as Calcraft swiftly drew the bolt, all eyes fixed on the 2 noosed figures silhouetted against the morning sky. The trapdoor opened, and the bodies dropped, swaying and twisting slowly with the momentum of their fall, and dying almost immediately. After an hour, the Mannings' corpses were cut down and buried, ironically enough, beneath the same type of paving stones within the prison as those under which they had buried Patrick O'Connor. The multitudes of scaffold aficionados slowly drifted away, savouring the morbid memories of what they had just witnessed, and looking forward with sadistic anticipation to the next occasion on which human beings would be so primitively dispatched into the next world. Surely, though, nothing could be more appropriate for the victim than to wear black for her execution. Yet when Marie Manning appeared on the scaffold clad in a black satin dress, edged with black lace, the hangman, William Calcraft, allowed her to have her eyes covered with her black handkerchief beneath the black veil that she was wearing. It is hardly surprising that the material of that colour rapidly went out of fashion for many years after.